Hi, everyone. Hello, and thanks for joining us for the June 2026 session of the From the Bench Virtual Studio Tour series. My name is Sarah Songer, and I'm the Education Program Manager at the San Francisco Center for the Book. And today we're happy to welcome Jessalyn Aaland and Paul Morgan to talk about their collaborative publishing practice, Current Editions. Formed in 2017, Current Editions publishes projects about micro-histories, niche artifacts, and public discourse, ranging from protests on San Francisco's Market Street to New England's unique contribution to target sports. Their work has been exhibited at SFMOMA, Gallery 16, Women's Studio Workshop, the Fog Art Fair, and art book fairs in Los Angeles, San Francisco, Seattle, and Boston. Current Editions publications are stocked at Printed Matter, the ICA London Bookshop, McNally Jackson, Skylight Books, Good Press, SFCB, and distributed worldwide through Public Knowledge. And so welcome, Jessalyn and Paul, and take it away.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thanks for joining today. Um, we're Current Editions, as you just heard. We are based in Emeryville, California. We have been publishing together since 2017. We love archives and information. That's what a lot of our publications focus on. So we thought we would give you a little bit of a tour of how we use archives in our work and the different ways that we use archives. And we're going to be switching off talking about each of those.
So, we wanted to first give some sort of context for where we came from. And most importantly, about 25 years ago, both Jessalyn and I were heavily involved in the DIY music community. So, we were in bands, we were booking shows, we were both doing this at the Che Cafe in San Diego on the UCSD campus. And what we quickly realized being in bands and making show posters was that if you have a noise show, and generally 6 people show up, you can make a really cool poster and get 11 people to show up. And that is a big benefit to everyone. So about 25 years ago, we started really focusing on making posters, setting up a screen printing setup in our studio, screen printing, doing collage posters. So how does this have anything to do with archives? Well, running the Che, it's a community run space with a lot of students. And as one could maybe imagine for this kind of space, there was a lot of consternation with the administration, and most people were students. So what we ended up doing was relying on the archive that existed at the Che from the previous 30 years of students who had come through. This archive really helped us with decisions we were making at the time, decisions that we knew were going to impact people in the future, and we were constantly adding to the archive there. So recently we were reflecting on, wow, our publishing practice really is all about archives. I wonder where this started. And we both kind of independently realized, oh, our experience at the Che, where an archive wasn't just this thing that sat in the corner and you never really engaged with it. It was this sort of living thing that informed what we were doing at the time, helped us plan for the future and understand what was happening in the past. So now we're going to talk about a few of our publications and the types of archives that were used to make them over the past couple of years.
Great. So this is one of our, I think this was actually our first official Current Editions publication, A Brief and Inconclusive History of Protests in San Francisco's Market Street. This was a dispersed archive that I was doing a lot of research for a public art project that was going to take place on Market Street. And so as part of it, I wanted to research the history of protests that had passed down the street. So what I wanted to include was a range of topics, like different kinds of protests, different years. So there's one, at least from every decade, going back to the late 1800s. And so I pulled, sometimes I used video clips. I would go to the Oakland Public Library and use the microfiche. And really, I just kind of wanted to capture this sense of protest history that exists in San Francisco. San Francisco is such an inspiring place. I made this booklet and felt even more inspired, like that I could actually make change. So the archives that I used kind of allowed me to see, like what Paul was saying, how people in the past enabled this future. And then I'm also part of that future. And then this is information we can take and build from going forward.
In the 1960s, the US government conducted three separate missions to put astronauts on the moon. In the process of these three missions, NASA generated 45,000 frames of film taken both by astronauts in space and cameras that were stuck to modules that were in space and landed on the moon. So these 45,000 photos are an extremely well-known archive and in fact contain photos that some people will argue are some of the most famous photos ever taken by humans, that being blue marble, that being Earthrise. So this archive, 45,000 photos, very well known. It's a government archive. And when we went in there, what we were looking for were what are the interesting ruptures that we can find? And it turns out that there are a few images in this archive of messed up frames of film, overexposed, underexposed, hands in front of the lens, things that were out of focus, pieces of film that were messed up from radiation in space. And so, Like Nothing on Earth is a book we made of these bloopers and flubs from early NASA missions. And this is an example of, regardless of how well known an archive could be, there are still going to be very interesting things in it. We were so happy when we found these images and we said, wow, this is a very fascinating slice of these missions and this period in US history. And when we found these images, we absolutely knew we had to publish this book. But this book is really standing in for the idea of an archive. It could be well known and there can still be really interesting things in it. And this sort of sums up what the current edition's ethos is get in the archive and see what's going on there and see what we find interesting, and we may publish it.
Yeah, and I think also once you start working with archives very quickly, kind of like most projects, you find out something and that leads you into a rabbit hole to look at more things and you get deeper into the archive. So this is a publication I made based on a community newspaper made by union workers in the 1930s. This was during the really big West Coast waterfront strike in 1934. This was all made by union workers. So they would work on the docks and the shipyards, and then they would spend the evening like making these mimeographing, sorry, these newsletters. And then they would sell them for like $1 to spread the message. So I found out about this archive when working on a public art project during the pandemic, where I was making newsletters about where we live. And the drawings just really captivated me. They're really funny. They're really biting. Some of them are really moving. The topics really range from like things that are relevant today, class war, kind of global fascism. We have lots of drawings of animals. On the bottom right, you can see this tribute to the workers that were killed by police during the strike. So, I just found them both funny and moving. And I really wanted to make a publication that collected all my favorite drawings. The newspapers would be about like 4 to 8 pages. But so I went through this entire archive. It is a project that's online through the ILWU, which the group of workers that made this became later on. So the ILWU owns the archive. They worked with the University of Washington to digitize these newsletters. So I went through every one that was available and just pulled out all of my favorite drawings, organized them by topic. And it really just kind of gives us a slice of what it was like to be a worker fighting for union rights during this time. These kind of activist struggles are important to us throughout our work. So we just wanted to highlight that. And I just think they're really funny. And so, yeah, that's that collection.
In the 1970s, the National Security Agency of the US government started publishing an internal, basically zine called Cryptolog. And the idea was the NSA wanted an internal publication that was focused on cryptology and how the emerging field of cryptology can benefit the NSA to basically do spying better. So I call it a zine because this publication was not made by some outside consulting company. It was an internal document written by NSA employees, printed by NSA employees, distributed by NSA employees, and most importantly to us, illustrated by NSA employees. So it lasted about 15 years and then abruptly shut down in the early 90s. So this archive of this publication was partially declassified in 2013. So as opposed to like Nothing on Earth, where it was NASA images and all documents made by NASA are in the public domain as soon as they're made, the scans of these zines were top secret and only became partially declassified in 2013. So we found the archive, we went through all these PDFs of these scans and realized, wow, this is, like I said, basically a zine that the NSA was making on this topic. And all of these drawings, these are all like headers and kind of like interstitial graphics that someone in the NSA, someone who was working for the US government's main spying agency, part of their day was spent making these somewhat trippy, very 70s, early 80s graphics to put into this zine that the NSA was making. So for us, this is a very interesting representation of the governments. They make a lot of documents. Sometimes they're public, sometimes they're private, sometimes they're top secret. Some of them eventually become declassified. And within this whole morass, there's going to be interesting things in them. So static magic is kind of a counterbalance to like Nothing on Earth, where all of these objects were made by the government, made by government employees, but some of these objects were immediately public. Some of these objects were private. Some of them were maybe never supposed to be seen by the public, but eventually became declassified. And this kind of archive and these kind of objects in the archive is, again, really what Current Editions loves to find. We had no idea what we were going to find when we dove into these, and then we realized, wow, this is really trippy. This is a kaleidoscopic view of, late 20th century American security state aesthetics. We had no idea this is what we were going to find in the archive. So archives, they are a great place to kind of have your mind blown. You never know what you're going to find.
So, we also wanted to talk about other kinds of archives we use. So we use, these archives that we've found maybe online or through doing research, maybe even in the physical archive at the library. But some of the archives that we use are also personal. This is a personal archive of mine. I have used a lot of stickers in my art, as Paul mentioned, when we were making show posters, I made collage ones. So for about 25 years, I would save the top of the sticker packet and just put it in a bag and be like, I'll figure out something to do with it, because they're all just super interesting to me. And then when we started publishing books, it was really natural that, of course, this needed to be a publication. So this is really a personal collection that I've had that I keep adding to. And I love these labels because it's kind of like it's a graphic design history, but it's a lot of them are made in this really like inexpensive way. Like there's like some graphic designer sitting there and they're like, okay, what are we going to do for the castle sticker? Let's draw some castles. A lot of times there's misprinted where the registration's off, and they're just like really cheaply made because the whole point is getting the product out there. So I just love seeing all these examples together. I love stickers, but these are also often as interesting as the stickers themselves to me. And then another example of a personal archive is this collection of photos called Girl Talk. This is a group of my friends and I have basically we send each other photos. One of Hi Rose, you're on the call. So I have about 5 friends that I text with regularly, and we all text each other these photos of our hands holding something. So like, for example, like, oh, I have too many jalapenos, or check out this weird worm I found in the garden. Or on the left, on the cover of the book, I had given my friend this ceramic peanut dish and she held it up to her dog like he was talking on the phone. So I've just collected these photos for years. And so this is kind of like a collective personal archive. So it's photos that are really intimate and personal, and it's just how we stay in touch in our day-to-day lives. But they have this common theme of sharing this personal moment. So, a range of moving from government to institutional to personal archives.
In the 20th century, the US government detonated over 1,000 nuclear weapons in the Nevada desert. So these were tests to create more powerful, more destructive, more effective weapons. And each of these tests were given a name, and the names were all kind of nonsensical and trippy. And at the same time, each of these tests were given a logo. So someone in the Department of Energy made logos for all of these nuclear weapon tests. And these logos were put on pins, they were put on patches, they were put on stickers, and they were handed out to everyone involved with the test. So the reason I knew about them is because I grew up with hats covered with the enamel pins of these logos because my dad worked as a physicist on a number of these tests. So this book is a collection of these nuclear test logos. Some of them are from Family Archive, and then other ones were part of a larger archive that could be found in the National Archives. So this is an example of, as opposed to Girl Talk, or as opposed to the sticker labeled book, where it's a personal archive. This is also a personal archive, but it's sort of part of a much larger sort of governmental institutional archive. So it's an example of growing up, I would be seeing these things and I sort of didn't have context for them. I mean, I knew they were involved with my dad's work, but I didn't have a context for, oh, there must be other logos like this, because when you're 8, you're not really thinking about that. But as time goes on, we realized, oh, there must be more of these. Let's go out and try to find them. Oh, there's this large collection of them that have been scanned. So it is, as opposed to some of these other governmental archives that we use to create these books, this really started as a personal family archive and then sort of transmogrified into going out and finding larger numbers than were just in the personal archive.
And so the last one we're going to talk about is this book, God Only Knows. So I think hopefully what you're taking away is we're really interested in visual culture, whether it's kind of like a folk culture or like an intimate, private, visual culture, or visual culture generated by the government or other organizations. This is an archive that's generated by the people of California. So this is a collective archive of vanity plates that people in California actually have. And a lot of people are interested in license plates. I'm sure many of you take photos when you see a great one out there. I have a lot of friends who send them to me. And I got interested in what plates people have. So I made a reverse lookup using the DMV website to figure out what plates do people have. It's really easy to find out what's available and what's not. And I really wanted to group these together, and it kind of makes a portrait of California and the people who live in it through what they choose to put on their car and display about their identity. So these are all grouped by topics. So vibes in California, or aesthetes, I call the section on the left. So of course I had to look up fonts. The sans serif one I actually saw in the wild. And then, people who love California and have something to say about California. So it's kind of a visual trip through California and the many diverse people that live in the state. And it also includes archival photos and some found text. So it's really kind of bridging this collective sense of archives, these more institutional archives, personal interests. And I just think archives are really generative, and we really like to surface maybe histories that are lesser known or small parts of our collective knowledge. And that's kind of a way we can all come together to understand who we are and where we're going. And I'll stop sharing in a moment. Paul, did you want to add anything before we
Yes.
go in?
So I hope what can be clear with these publications that we make are archives are wide ranging. There's large numbers of them, very varied. Many people work on them. We greatly salute archivists. We greatly salute people who spend the time, spend their lives bringing these objects into a space where they could be preserved. We love their work. We love that they dedicate time and energy into doing this. And we just want to make it clear that archives, it's a land of contrasts. There's a lot of different ones. We're invested in certain kinds, as can be seen by the publications that we make, but there is a archive that you will be interested in. That is kind of the big takeaway from us. And every time we delve into an archive, Jessalyn kind of gestured at this, we end up sort of spinning out into, oh, we need to look at four other ones. You know, we find one thing in an archive and go, oh, we have to ping over to this second archive. And, oh, we found three more things in the second archive. So it ends up sort of being this moving through these archives, and we are finding things that we are greatly invested in. And so once again, we salute the people who make these things happen, and we hope that you can be sort of inspired to go into these archives and find something, because you will be pleasantly surprised what you will be able to discover in an archive.
Thank you guys. That was really fun. I love how you set that up so that we could see just like the range of personal to governmental and all of those overlaps. I know I have a lot of questions. If you have questions, please put them in the chat so that I can ask them. And I would like to start by saying that what I noticed in your presentation was sort of like a little nod to the hidden stories. And when I'm hearing you talk and I'm thinking about all, do you guys find yourself wanting to make up stories and tell yourselves things about the people whose work you're finding in these archives? Like I'm looking at the little fortune teller in that one, or the color theory eyeball in the NSA. Do you find yourselves wanting, like, curious about more than just the things you find, but the people behind them?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think with Hold That Line, I think a lot about the waterfront workers and what their day-to-day lives were like, and what they were going through, because it's really clearly outlined in the newspapers. And a lot of the newsletters they made would be like calling out specific people by name, or just like talking really literally about their struggles. So it gives me a lot of empathy for the people of this time, and almost 100 years later, like we're fighting some of the same fights, but I imagine a lot about what their lives were like. In God Only Knows, the book about license plates, that's really the premise of the book, is imagining the people who have these license plates and like why they chose it, what they hope to say, because they're mostly people I don't know and mostly plates I haven't seen. And so a lot of it is like imagining, through seven letters, what someone wants to convey about themselves and what it says about us as Californians, as people. So, yeah, I think about that a lot.
Sarah, you would not believe how much time in my life I have spent thinking about who in the Department of Energy was making all of these logos for these nuclear weapon tests. Someone was doing it, and they have sort of a very specific aesthetic. So it was very clear. It's very clear, at least to us, that it was the same person doing it. And so we think about it all the time. And especially for these publications that are specifically, here is a graphic, or like here's a logo, someone had to make it. With Static Magic, you are an NSA employee, you are working for the NSA, you are interested in spying. Also, you're interested in making trippy graphics. Okay, the world contains multitudes. There's a lot of different people out there. So yes, I'm glad you asked this question, because it takes up a lot of brain space thinking about who in 1975 was drawing a header for an article about cryptology for the NSA.
Yeah, I would waste hours and hours and weeks of my life probably wondering who this person was that I will never be able to find out. Um, we're getting archives questions, of course. That makes a lot of sense. And so obviously there's a range of archives. Do you have ways in which you find things? Do you need credentials to access things? Obviously, online is more accessible, probably, but can you tell us just a little bit more about how you find these archives?
Yeah, well, the National Archives we've used a lot, and that belongs to all of us Americans, so they are available for all of us to use. Um, so we kind of tend to use publicly available archives for that reason. And we're also interested in like institutions and government and how it impacts our lives. So I would say that's just an organic interest. The book I made with my friends was great because I got to text my friends and say, "Hey, do you want to have some images in a book?" So it kind of ranges depending. But yeah, Paul, if you want to weigh in.
We are forever indebted to the National Archives and the work that they do and the constant threat that they're under over, the past 2 years and periods of time before that is very disheartening because there's a statute passed by the American Congress that says the National Archives are going to store records that are important to the public. So we spend a lot of time on the National Archives website. You have to get really good at Boolean searches. It doesn't have necessarily the best search functionality. Now we are very happy it exists. So we tend to stay sort of in the public archive infrastructure. And it's not because we just are thinking, oh, we can drag things out of it and we're not going to get in trouble. But as Jessalyn said, we are very interested in governments, bureaucracy, the aesthetics that come from bureaucracy, the aesthetics created within these institutions that end up being the work of one person, but end up being representative of the government as a whole. Like the nuclear weapon tests, basically one person drew all these and now they're the face of the most destructive objects ever made by humans. Were they thinking about that? I don't know. But those are the kind of questions we are really invested in. And these public archives from the US government or state governments kind of bring those questions to the fore in a way that private archives or sort of smaller non-governmental archives don't necessarily have that breadth. We love all archives though.
Thanks. I'm really interested in your collaboration and curious about it looks like you guys sort of take turns, maybe spearheading a project. Yours, do you just present an idea to the other person and then you guys decide that, yeah, this is good? Does one person ever say no? Is it collaborative and more than sort of in the umbrella way, or is it Jessalyn production pretty much Jessalyn's job?
I would say we are intimately involved in each other's work. We've known each other for over 25 years. So, we spend a lot of our time discussing ideas for publications, and it's like, okay, here's maybe like five I want to make at any moment. Obviously, my time's limited. Which one should we move forward with? It kind of rises to the surface, but we talk through the idea. We both help each other mold the publications quite a lot. Like my publication, God Only Knows on License Plates, Paul had the idea to bring in text running below the plates. And I never would have thought of that. And it caused me to do a bunch of my own personal writing, which was really fun. And so we're always bringing new ideas to the other person and looking at things in a different way. We edit each other's work. And then with running the press, we sort of have different roles we just have naturally fallen into. Paul does a lot of the technical stuff and the physical printing. I do most of the business stuff. So we kind of branch off that way. But I would say we're both really, no one's going to say, like, don't make your publication. It's ultimately your work as an artist. But I do think we both talk through what makes sense for our press and like, what should we put our resources into? And we do kind of talk through it together. Yeah.
I count myself really lucky to be able to do this with Jessalyn because I look at people who run presses by themselves and it seems so daunting to come up with an idea and execute it and not necessarily have someone who's going to yell at you and be like, this is a bad idea, or sort of, this is a kernel of an idea, but it's not a fully formed idea. Let's sort of work to flesh this out. Let's make this as good as it can be. And having two people who have known each other for a really long time and understand each other's sort of ways that we view the world, this is a strength. And I do not understand how other people do this by themselves, because I have lots of dumb ideas all the time. And I go, hey, Jessalyn, what about this? And she's like, no, like, let's rethink that. And so it is not in any way like, oh, there's this constant friction. It is a beneficial collaboration, and it has served us well, because I look back and I look at publications that we were mulling over a couple years ago, and I go, wow, this is a really great idea. We didn't make that. Not because it was an inherently bad idea, but there's a lot of things we need to take into account before making a publication, not least of which is anyone else going to care about this? Because, you know, one of the points of running a press is, are there other people in the world who will be an audience for an object that we're going to make? We find a lot of things interesting. Will other people find these things? And so just having two people who could kind of come together and go, oh, okay, let's sort of massage some idea and find what's actually interesting in it. I find that to be one of our strengths. And I do not understand how people do this by themselves.
Yeah, and I'll add, like, talking to our other publisher friends, this is kind of the constant dance with publishing, is like any publication you make involves investing resources like time, but also money and energy and creativity. So it's like, you know, it's great to have endless creativity, but like time is a limit. So it's like, how do you decide which is the thing you move forward? And I find the having someone else to bounce that idea off, to be like, a lot of the ideas we are interested in are very niche. And it's like, maybe do we want to, how important is it to make this publication that 5 people might be interested in? Like, sure, maybe like we could do anything, but like I think we, as we get older, we have to be more judicious with how we're investing those time and resources. So we really help each other do that.
Thanks. Is it okay if we go just a little bit over with one more question that will kind of wrap things up, because we also have people who are curious in sort of this process that you're alluding to of figuring out how you're going to choose what happens. And so could you just talk a little bit in general about like what a timeline might be for a project? And I mean, obviously you're taking into consideration, does anybody else care about this? But do you have a standard edition size, or is there something that makes something a success? Are you all self-funded? You know, like lots of curiosity about that.
I will say it depends on the publication, but God only knows I worked on that for over 2 years, just looking up license plates, and it changed shape like 50 million times while I was working on it. And then other publications are able to come together more quickly because it's a more limited focus, like the book Girl Talk I made with my friends or the sticker book. It's like I have this archive, so I just kind of need to make some decisions. So I would say, Paul, you should win, but I'm like maybe 6 months is a good time frame. It also, yeah, it depends how we're printing it, if we're making it ourselves or working with an outside vendor. Our edition size has tended to be around 500. That's kind of grown as we've been operating over the last few years. We tend to do a lot of wholesale because we like our work being distributed and getting it in the hands of people. So, yeah.
It is always this aspirational, oh, this is not going to take very long when a project starts. Yeah, it does. This is going to be great. It's going to take a couple of weeks, and then months go by. So we've learned to sort of tamp down the expectation of this is going to go quickly. And what Jessalyn said, it's usually about 6 months, 4 to 6 months. We feel one of the things we are very careful about is sort of inflows and outflows of capital, and just being aware of, is anyone going to buy this? And a benefit to us, I think, is very soon after we started publishing, we really found our audience, and our audience is very specific, and they tend to be very honed in on our world. And we developed this by doing a lot of book fairs, and there will be people who walk up to our table and go, wow, this is great. I totally have found my home. And then other people walk up to our table, scan it for 2 seconds, and turn on their heel and walk away. And we go, wow, this is not your world. And I think a benefit to us is very quickly we found that we had an audience. And so when we were making decisions about books, we also sort of tend to try to keep those people in mind. Not, we need to be publishing for the marketplace, but also money isn't infinite. We don't have infinite resources. We have to make decisions based on what we're going to be able to sell. So runs of 500 work well for us. Like Jessalyn said, we're kind of a volume. We have a volume mindset. We come sort of from DIY music world, so we don't, to us, price things very high. We try to keep things affordable. We like ideas being out in the world. So, we have equations to figure out how much something is going to cost based on how much it costs for us to make it. Like, we tend to get really in the weeds with numbers. And I think that is the only way to be sustainable in the US. As knowing other publishers in other parts of the world and just looking at, wow, you get grants from the government to be doing your publishing practice. That would be interesting to live in a space like that. We don't live in a country that offers those kind of opportunities. So we have to be a bit ruthless with numbers, and we're happy to do that, and we're fine to do that. And sometimes people, when you are in an artistic practice, that's not necessarily something you want to think about. But when we started this, we realized, yeah, we kind of have to be careful. We can't just we're doing everything. But the key thing was finding an audience and realizing we had one, and sort of thinking about those people as we were making new publications.
Well, thank you guys. Thanks for staying late and answering those questions. That was really interesting. And I hope a lot of people find this video. I think you have a lot of interesting things to say about publishing and making things in this current day weird world. So thank you all for joining us today. And we're taking July off. So we will be back in August with another presentation. So watch the newsletter for that announcement, and I hope that we'll see you again. And thank you again, Jessalyn and Paul, for taking the time to be with us today. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.